Hi all, ACDodd here again, and welcome to another episode of On The Road Tuning with me, ACDodd. And this time we're going to go out to Leatherhead and we're going to look at Austin Cooper S. But this time we're going to do a deep dive. Okay, so where are we today? Well, today I'm in Leatherhead and I've got this beautiful original Austin Cooper S 1275's. Lovely. So let's have a look under the bonnet, see what we got. So under the bonnet we've got a pretty standard 1275 Cooper S engine. So the owner doesn't want to go on video, which is absolutely fine with me. So what we're going to do is get stuck in and see what it's doing. Okay, so I've got the engine running now. So let's have a quick rev. Now, I don't know if you can hear that, but it's actually misfiring. So what we're going to do is start going through the car, see if we can find that misfire. Okay, so let's cut back to me. So deep dive, what's that all about? Well, this is basically where I'll give you a bit more information about what's going on and a bit more understanding and explaining of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So in this case, as we've just seen, that engine has got quite a nasty misfire, although you can't hear it properly. It's actually only running on about 3.5 cylinders, or you know, maybe even 2.5 really. It wasn't running well. Anyway, the point is, people now call me out for tune-ups, and some of the time they're calling me out and the car's clearly running poorly, like this one. Now there is a risk actually, if you call me out and it's running like this, then actually there is a risk I can't actually fix it, because it might be like a blown head gasket, or it might be a burnt valve, or things like that, which I can't obviously fix when I'm on the road. But in this case, let's dig in and see why this has got a misfire. Okay, first things first. So what I found with the misfire, it was quite straightforward. We had a couple of things, one of which is there was the king lead had a little tail of the carbon string hanging out the end, and there was evidence of a little bit of arcing. So I cut that off and fitted an extra insulator on the inside. The coil itself is only a 3.3 ohm, so not particularly high power. But then again, once we looked at the plugs, a truer picture of what's going on can be found. So as you can see, all those plugs are soot black. Now the owner tells me they've only been in there about 10 miles. So clearly what's happened here is, I think what's happened is the spark plugs got sooted up and it's just stopped firing. So what I'm going to do is fit a new set of spark plugs and then lean the mixture off, and hopefully that solves the problem. So what we saw there was fouled spark plugs. Now the interesting thing about those fouled spark plugs on this car is it was nothing to do with the car itself, but there was a history of poor running. So the owner had a few people look at that car, and all that they had progressively done is kept riching in the fuel mixture. So one of the issues that DIY people have is they have this innate belief that they can set the fuel mixture by turning the screws and listening to it. You can't do that. Okay, now in order to correct the mixture here, I had to turn the screws back 10 flats on each carb, because that's how rich it was. So what this demonstrates, and it's not just this car, it's a number of cars that I actually look at, is that people have no idea A, how to set the mixture, B, the effect of setting that mixture, C, how that adjusting the mixture nut affects the mixture, and D, even though the spark plugs were only 10 miles old, they were ruined. Okay, so you know, just because you put the plugs in you know, that morning, 10 miles later you've actually ruined a set of plugs. So you know, people need to understand that if you want engines to run properly, you need to measure stuff, and one of those things is the mixture. So having a wideband gauge fitted in your car, and in this case it would have helped, because the people would have seen that the car's running very, very rich, and they would have been able to adjust the fuel mix to compensate. There's also a belief that you know, running your car lean is bad. Okay, well, the problem with that is it demonstrates that people, again, don't understand the engine requirements. Running an engine lean at part throttle and idle is not bad for the engine at all. It's actually good, and the reason for it being good is it doesn't wash the lubrication off the cylinder bores, and it prolongs the engine life when you're doing cruising, etc., etc. And it's obviously good on fuel. Now, I agree that running an engine lean at or near full power is likely to cause it damage, melted pistons, etc. Right, and that is actually true. So the only point you want a rich mixture is at full power. You do not want a rich mixture on a road car at any point other than when you are starting to, you know, get towards maximum power and high revs. So if you're cruising, it's all about lean. If you're idling, it's all about lean. Having the mixture as rich as this on this engine, all it will cause is washing the rings out and lead to a premature engine rebuild. Now, that's a Cooper S engine. That's going to cost the owner quite a bit of money to actually rebuild that engine, and it's completely needless. It's all done by people thinking they know best by turning the screws. I cannot stress enough, get yourself a wideband fitted in your classic cars, a wideband gauge that is, get it in your car, and you can use that gauge to actually set the mixture properly. Now, the other problem you get is people turn the mixture screws because the engine doesn't drive properly. Well, turning the mixture screws, unfortunately, is not the way to set your fueling, and I'll explain why. So if I come over to the whiteboard here, and I'll draw a graph. So along the x-axis we have RPM, and up on the y-axis we have enrichment. Okay, or effectively what I mean by enrichment is how far we turn the mixture screw. So if we have a few lines on the graph, and if we call that stoichiometry, so that's 1.0 lambda or 14.7 parts to 1 for AFR people, and if we say above the line is richer and below the line is leaner. Okay, so if I just move that out of the way for the minute, because we don't need that, and then say an engine would typically run, I'll just put load on the end there as well, so the more RPM and the more load we get. So you typically want fueling to be as close to that, or maybe, depending on the engine, even slightly leaner than the stoichiometry line. But let's assume that we've got a standard ignition system, low power system. So we want to run our fuel mixture along there, and then perhaps getting richer, okay, towards the high RPM, high load, okay, typical fueling curve. So what happens when we turn the mixture screw? What's the effect on the fueling in an SU? Well, it doesn't change how you think it changed. A lot of people think it does this, okay, you know, their belief is that the fueling curve just moves up. Okay, that's not true. If that was true, everybody would be tuning SUs and it would be easy. You just turn the mixture nut and it solves all the problems. It doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, when you turn the mixture nut, what happens is this. If you turn it a few flats, it will move it here. We don't know how far up, but it will move it here. But the line changes shape. Okay, so typically it'll do that. Okay, and that's not too bad. So let's turn it some more. 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 So what you'll notice is the more you turn the mixture screw, the more it increases the fueling at low speeds. It also increases the fueling at low speeds and cruise. Okay, so the important thing to understand is if you've not got enough fueling at the top end of the rev range, turning that mixture screw makes little effect, okay, on the top end fueling. All it does is it increases the air fuel ratio, or it increases the mixture richness when your engine's idling at part throttle, and that's due to the way the engine, the SU fuels by using the same metering needle to control idle and part throttle and full power conditions. So turning the mixture screw is not the way to adjust the fueling to get your engine to fuel properly, because all you will do at any of the lower RPM points and part throttle is make the engine excessively rich. And what I mean by excessively rich is, so I'll take this red pen, and if I add this line, and I'm going to call that the bore wash limit. Doesn't matter where it is, but that red line is the indicates where bore wash might be. So turning the mixture nut richer will push the mixture way into bore wash for most of the RPM rev range, okay, especially at part throttle. Now if you think where you drive the car, 95% of the time you drive the car you're on light load part throttle, because you're driving down the road, you're going to the shops, you're cruising on the motorway. This is where ring wear happens, and this is where most of your engine wear happens in that situation. So the way to do it, if you've got a problem at high RPM, is you change the needle to fuel properly at the high RPM point, turn the mixture nut down so you can have the mixture where it needs to be, which is lean for most of the rev range, and then it increases to the full power point when you need it. And that is delivered by the shape of the needle, not turning the mixture nut. Now I hope I've made myself clear enough that you understand why you do not use the mixture nut to adjust the fueling or try and get rid of flat spots on an SU powered engine. Okay, hopefully that enabled you to understand a little bit more about why turning the mixer screw isn't the way forward. Now clearly there are other things that I've missed out there, like the correct spring, the right damper, the correct oil and all the rest of it. I'm purely addressing one issue, which is turning the mixture nut, and it's irrespective of all those other parts. So anyway, you've had enough of me. Let's get back to the tuning video. So sure enough, fitted a new set of BP6 ES spark plugs. The original plugs weren't gapped, so they was taken out of the packet and put in, so the gap was far too wide, about 35 thou. So I've dropped the gaps down to 25. I took 4 flats off each carburetor on the mixture, started it up, and boom, we got all 4 cylinders. So the problem here was clearly ignition related misfire. So sorted up plugs, that happened in about 10 miles because the carburetors were too rich. So this is one of those examples of, if you take spark plugs out and they look bad, then sure enough, if your carburetors or your carburetor settings are too rich, it's going to ruin a new set of plugs in no time, which is what happened here. So what I can now do is carry on with the tune. Okay, so the engine's running. Just having a look at the dwell meter, and we can see we've only got 48, so there should be about 60 on here. So that's again another reason why. So we're losing about 20% coil power. So let's get that dialed in, and then we'll up the coil power some more. Okay, so Dizzy's out, and the reason for it is it's got a cheap condenser in it. Now the owner has told me this car's cut out before on him, so I'm always suspicious of these, so I'm just going to change that for the heavy duty one that Mini Spares sell, because I know that they're a lot more reliable. So even though that's a new one, we're going to put a much more expensive one in it, so hopefully head off any troubles at the pass. And then obviously if we look at that points gap, I'll just zoom right in, you can see that that's big, and that showed up on the dwell meter as a much smaller dwell, so he's only getting 48. So this system should run on about 60 degrees. So what I'm going to do is reduce that gap. There is a little bit of grease on the on the cam, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more. As I say, put a different condenser in and we'll pop that back in and get it all timed up. So, dwell angle. One of the things that people don't understand about dwell angle is you know, what's the point of the dwell angle? Well, the point of the dwell angle is to make sure there's enough time for the coil to charge and get a full charge between firings. And in this case, if your dwell angle's small, that means the points gap's big. That also means that the charging time for the coil is reduced. So in this case, it's about 20% less than it needs to be, which is quite substantial considering we have a coil which is only 3.3 ohms. So it's not a particularly high power 12 volt coil. So in actual fact, this engine needs all the spark energy it can muster. So adjusting the points gap here will pay dividends in being able to ignite the fuel properly and reduce any chance of misfires, and also increase our ability to light off a leaner mix at part throttle. While we're also on the subject of the distributor, you can see I've now got the rotor arm on. Now the problem with the rotor arm is it's all loose and there's absolutely nothing holding it on. So even though that's a proper S1 with a counterbalance at the back and everything else, that's no use to man or beast, because that's flopping around like a good one. So that'll be you know, adding to spark scatter and all the rest of it. So we need to change that for a nice snug one. Okay, so what do we do to this now? So this is all ready to go back on. So I had, amazingly, because I don't normally carry these, but I happen to have in my stores a mini spares 23D type rotor. So fitted that on, that's nice and tight, no wobble, that's lovely. So we fixed that issue. I've re-gapped the points to bring that gap down. And we've also fitted another condenser. Now, as it turns out, I was a bit slack and I didn't have a spare heavy duty one with me, but the owner just so happened to have a genuine unipart replacement one. So I've put that in, and a new old stock, so hopefully that's going to be good anyway. So with everything in there set up, let's get it all back in and see how she responds. With the Cooper S, you'll notice the distributor there is a non-vacuum unit. So that's the 23D Lucas type. And that was fitted by the factory because they intended that car to be used in competition. So you won't need a vacuum unit. Not having a vacuum unit on in a modern scenario now, when you're trying to use that car on the road, means you're going to lose probably 6, maybe 8 to the gallon during cruising, because you're also not introducing extra advance to take advantage of a partially filled cylinder, which will have a much slower burn. So you need to advance the ignition to compensate. That's why other cars and more modern cars have ignition advance vacuum cans on the distributors to take advantage of that. My advice to people who are running distributors with no vacuum units, especially the classic cars like the Coopers and stuff, which have a road engine and it's not particularly modified, is to actually fit a more modern Dizzy and keep that old Dizzy you know, safely to one side. So we're not talking about completely getting rid of it, we're talking about just safely storing it so you don't affect obviously the value of the vehicle. But if you want to make the vehicle more usable, then add in a suitable aftermarket distributor with the appropriate advance curve, and also a vacuum unit can pay dividends. And what I mean by that is more fuel economy, especially if you're using the car a lot, and also things like keeping the exhaust valves cooler. So when the engine's actually running retarded ignition while you're cruising, that actually tends to blow torch your exhaust valve somewhat. So actually by actually running a distributor can actually save you money on engine parts and wear, and possibly reduce the chance of cracking your cylinder head, which we all know on a Cooper S is is a thing, and it's a thing because it runs very large valves. So actually having a vacuum unit there can reduce the temperatures in the engine, which will help with the reliability of the cylinder head. The other thing it does is it actually makes the engine more responsive to drive and more rewarding. So it will actually drive better than it would do if, as it left the factory. So as I say, there are good benefits to be had by having a vacuum unit. Okay, so moving on through the tune, obviously we've got the distributor back in, that's all working sweet. I've got it timed in 30 degrees full in, which is seems to be responding well. Moving over to the carburetors, obviously our main issue was that these were very, very rich. So I'm now 10 flats leaner on each carb. And also, the reason why the tops are off is this one was richer than that one. So what I've basically done now is I've balanced, so I've set up the jet heights with a vernier, so they're both the same from the bridge. We're going to put it back together and then see what it's done to the fueling, and then see if we need to do any needle mods. So, where did we get to in the end? I've got this all finished. We've got twin carbs are worn, so spindle bushes are worn, so they need to be rebuilt. We got fueling that's a bit wondrous. I've also taken out the air filters in there. The fueling is actually pretty good across the rev range now, so I didn't need to change the needles. So it was obviously too rich with the standard airbox on. The jet heights were different, so I had to sort those out. And then obviously we've already talked about the ignition, and obviously we had to change the points, condenser, rotor arm, etc. Advanced curves all good, so yeah, what with a set of new plugs in it, I'll send the owner out and it, and hopefully he will notice a huge difference. Okay, so I've pulled out spark plug number 2 after a good old test drive, and that's looking pretty good for me. Now I'm very happy with how clean that's come up. It is a tiny bit sooty on the outside, but we do have a problem with the worn carburetor, so our fueling is kind of a bit variable. But in terms of how that's now running, that's keeping its plugs nice and clean. So the car is running very well. The owner is very happy with the performance. So my work here is done. Okay, just to round off there, obviously the owner did go for a test drive and he was extremely happy, big smile on his face with the way the engine was running. And it's just worth noting there that when I come out to twin carb cars, usually, and I mean 90% of them, have got worn out carburetors. So what I do is I tend not to come out to cars that have got worn out carburetors. Now, in this case, the owner believed that he'd done sufficient work to them to make them serviceable. Whilst they were working, they weren't able to hold the fueling correctly. So what was happening was, you know, when you rev the car, it was coming back. As the revs come back down, the mixture ratio was changing. And when it was idling, the mixture ratio was varying because the carburetors were struggling to control the fueling. So it's one thing to remember is one SU, when it's worn, will struggle to control the fueling. Two SUs fighting against each other will do it a lot worse. Okay, so if you want the best out of SUs, and your tune-up is, first thing, rebuild the carburetors properly. And what I mean by that is changing spindles and the bushes to reduce the clearance on the throttle shaft to the absolute minimum. And what that does is it reduces the variance in air leaks and minimises the variation that you get when the engine's running and when you throttle it and it returns to idle, etc. That you've always got a constant very, very small air leak because on the HS carburetors they don't have any throttle shaft seals. So as long as it's constant, doesn't matter. It's when it changes that you can't compensate for. So what does a worn throttle spindle look like? So I'll go and get some carbs and show you what to look for. Okay, this is a rather obscure angle. I'm just holding a set of twin carbs in my hand. This is an old set that are in for a rebuild. But what you can see there in the centre of the screen is the brass throttle spindle coming out through the body. So now, if I move that, you will see the play in that shaft, okay? And that is because the shaft is worn and the body is worn. And that is far too much play to have in your throttle spindles, okay? This is what causes the car to have erratic idle. Also, when you pull up to the traffic lights and it stalls on you, things like that, this is all related to this issue. So we've seen what the wear looks like. How do you fix it? Well, Berlin Fuel Systems sell carburetor rebuild kits, and I'm being deliberate when I say carburetor rebuild kits because they also sell a service kit. Now, majority of people I go to fit a service kit in the belief that will solve their problems. A service kit does not solve that problem. The only way to solve that problem is to buy a full rebuild kit and have the carburetors properly reworked. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I tried a deep dive version. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you want me to do any more of these, then I will consider doing it on the appropriate vehicles. But as ever, please like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much.